Hey guys, tonight we journey to a time when suspicion was as thick as winter fog and a whispered accusation could be a death sentence. We're stepping into Salem Village, Massachusetts in the chilling winter of 1692, just as the infamous witch trials are about to ignite. Forget the romanticized version of colonial America. The truth? You probably wouldn't survive a single day in this world of suffocating paranoia where your neighbor's fear was your greatest enemy, and even a bad dream could land you in the gallows. So, subscribe, but only if you truly enjoy these historical deep dives. Let me know in the comments where you're listening from and the time. It's always great to see our global community. Now, dim the lights, get comfortable, and let's explore how quickly a society can unravel when fear takes control. Imagine opening your eyes on a frigid February morning in 1692. Congratulations, you're alive. That might be the last good news you hear for a while. The first thing that hits you is the smell, a potent mix of unwashed bodies, animal waste, and rotting straw. The cold air stings your nostrils as you lie on a straw-filled wooden frame that serves as your bed. The wool blanket is heavy and scratchy, offering little comfort. The room is a small, dark wooden box. The walls are rough logs chinked with mud, and the only light comes from the dying embers of a fire. There are no windows, as glass is a luxury you can't afford. The fire is your only source of heat, and it's a constant battle to stay warm without getting burned. You're not alone. You share this space with your entire family and your livestock. The cow, essential for your survival, lives with you, adding her own unique aroma to the air. Privacy is a foreign concept. Everyone sleeps in the same room, privy to every sound and smell. You try to sit up, and your body aches. At 25, you feel middle-aged. The floor is packed dirt, cold, and uneven. Outside, the wind howls, and a distant church bell reminds you that in this theocratic society, God is always watching. This is your new reality. No running water, no electricity, no privacy, no comfort. You're trapped in a one-room box with your family and animals, in the middle of a Massachusetts winter, in a community on the brink of hysteria. And this is just the beginning. Welcome to colonial housing, where home sweet home takes on a whole new meaning. Your house is a single room measuring 16 by 20 feet, housing your entire family, possessions, and livestock. It's like fitting your entire modern life into a walk-in closet made of logs. The walls are rough-hewn logs with gaps stuffed with mud, moss, and animal hair. This chinking is supposed to keep out the elements. It doesn't. The roof is wooden shingles held by pegs and prayers. When it rains, water finds every weakness, creating puddles throughout your living space. The floor is packed earth, cold in winter and dusty in summer. Privacy doesn't exist. The entire family sleeps in the same room, often in the same bed. Your straw mattress has been compressed into something resembling concrete, but with more bugs. Your home is an ecosystem of pests. Fleas, lice, bedbugs, mice, rats, and spiders have all claimed territory. Your furniture consists of a rough table, a few stools, and maybe a chest. Most people own one set of clothes, one bowl, one spoon, and a blanket. The hearth dominates one wall, providing heat, light, and cooking capability. It requires constant attention and fills the room with smoke because chimneys are more suggestion than function. You share your space with animals because they represent wealth that must be protected from freezing. The smell is overwhelming. Unwashed bodies, animal waste, smoke, damp straw, and rotting wood. The temperature is either too hot near the fire or freezing everywhere else. There's no insulation, and cold air seeps through every crack. Sanitation is non-existent. A chamber pot serves as the family toilet, sitting in the corner and contributing to the aromatic symphony. When full, its contents are thrown into the street. Water must be carried by hand from wells or streams, and there's no plumbing or hot water. Storage is a constant challenge. Your winter food supply hangs from rafters or sits in barrels, constantly threatened by rodents. Everything you own is visible and accessible to every resident, human and animal. This is your sanctuary. Cold, crowded, smelly, uncomfortable, and dangerous. Fire could destroy everything. The roof could collapse. Disease could spread rapidly, and soon this home could become a target for witchcraft accusations. But at least you have shelter. In 1692, Salem Village, that makes you fortunate. Now it's time to begin your morning routine, which bears absolutely no resemblance to anything you'd recognize as civilized human behavior. The concept of a private bathroom is as foreign as space travel. Instead, you're greeted by the sight and smell of a chamber pot that's been collecting the family's nocturnal contributions throughout the long, cold night. This ceramic vessel, sitting brazenly in the corner of your shared living space, is your toilet, sink, and constant reminder of humanity's most basic needs. Using it requires performing your most private bodily functions in full view of your entire family, including children, grandparents, and whoever else happens to be sharing your 16 by 20 foot palace. There's no privacy, no dignity, and certainly no toilet paper. Instead, you make do with whatever's available, rough cloth rags that have been used and reused until they're more holes than fabric, leaves that you've hopefully correctly identified as non-poisonous, or moss that you've scraped from the north side of trees. The chamber pot itself is a marvel of medieval engineering, which is to say it's a simple ceramic bowl with no lid, no ventilation, and no consideration for the olfactory sensibilities of its users. By morning, it's a concentrated essence of human waste that would make a modern sewage treatment plant seem like a perfume factory. The smell doesn't just assault your nostrils, it seems to penetrate your very soul, leaving you wondering if you'll ever again experience air that doesn't carry the distinctive aroma of communal bathroom facilities. Someone must empty this ceramic cauldron of misery, and that someone is probably you, because in colonial households, unpleasant tasks are distributed based on a complex hierarchy that somehow always leaves you at the bottom. You must carry this sloshing bowl of liquid nightmare through your living space, past your sleeping family members, past your breakfast preparations, and out into the frozen wasteland that passes for a street. The streets of Salem Village are themselves a testament to humanity's relationship with waste management, which is to say, they have no relationship at all. You dump the contents of your chamber pot directly into the street, where it joins the contributions of your neighbours in creating an open-air sewer system that would make ancient Rome weep with envy. These streets are a frozen mixture of human waste, animal droppings, kitchen scraps, and mud that you must navigate daily, creating an obstacle course that challenges both your physical balance and your ability to suppress your gag reflex. Personal hygiene, as you understand it, simply doesn't exist. The very concept of daily bathing is not just impractical, but actively dangerous, according to the medical wisdom of the time. Water is believed to open the pores of your skin, creating pathways for disease and evil humours to enter your body. Most people haven't had a full bath in months, and some haven't bathed in years. The closest thing to personal cleanliness is the occasional practice of dry cleaning, which involves changing your undergarments when they become so stiff with accumulated sweat, dirt, and bodily fluids that they can practically stand up on their own. Your hair has become a thriving ecosystem, home to a colony of lice that have established permanent residence and seem to be thriving in their new environment. These tiny parasites are not discriminating. They infest the hair of rich and poor, young and old, saint and sinner with equal enthusiasm. Delousing is a regular family activity, a bonding experience where loved ones sit together and pick through each other's hair with the dedication of archaeologists excavating ancient ruins. But no matter how diligent your efforts, the lice always return, like tiny vampires that refuse to be permanently evicted from their chosen homeland. Dental hygiene consists of occasionally chewing on a twig, preferably one from a tree that's rumoured to have medicinal properties, though the scientific basis for this belief is roughly equivalent to the effectiveness of wishing upon a star. There are no toothbrushes, no toothpaste, no dental floss, and certainly no dental care beyond the occasional extraction performed by the local barber surgeon with all the finesse of a medieval torturer. Your teeth are slowly decaying, your gums are bleeding, and your breath has achieved a potency that could be weaponized in times of war. Tooth pain is a constant companion, a dull ache that occasionally flares into agony that makes you question whether life is worth living. When a tooth becomes absolutely unbearable, your only option is to visit the barber surgeon, who will yank it out with iron pliers while you scream and pray for unconsciousness. Getting dressed is a process that involves putting on your single outfit, the same clothes you've been wearing for weeks, without washing, because washing clothes is a major undertaking that requires heating large quantities of water, making soap from animal fat and lye, and spending an entire day scrubbing, rinsing, and drying. Your clothes are made of rough wool that scratches against your skin like sandpaper made from the tears of angels. Underwear, as a concept, doesn't exist, which means your rough woolen garments are in direct contact with your skin, creating friction that leaves you raw and chafed in places you'd rather not think about. Your socks, if you're fortunate enough to own them, are hand-knitted wool creations that have been darned and redarned so many times that they're more repair than original sock. They're perpetually damp from a combination of melted snow, sweat, and the general humidity that comes from living in a poorly ventilated space with multiple humans and animals. The dampness creates a perfect breeding ground for fungal infections that would make a modern podiatrist rich beyond their wildest dreams. Shoes are a luxury that many people simply can't afford, and even if you're fortunate enough to own a pair, they're roughly stitched leather contraptions that provide minimal protection against the elements and even less comfort. Most people go barefoot year-round, developing calluses thick enough to serve as natural shoes, or they wrap their feet in rags and hope for the best. Walking on frozen ground in inadequate footwear is a daily exercise in pain tolerance that would challenge a medieval monk's commitment to suffering. Your grooming routine, such as it is, involves running your fingers through your lice-infested hair in a futile attempt to achieve some semblance of order. There are no mirrors in your home, so you have no idea what you look like, which is probably a mercy, because the sight would likely send you into a depression that would last until spring. If you're lucky, there might be a basin of water available for splashing on your face, assuming it hasn't frozen solid overnight, which it probably has, because your home's heating system consists of a single fireplace that's about as effective at warming the entire space as a candle would be at heating a cathedral. Breakfast is a meal that exists more in theory than in practice, a cruel joke played by necessity on your empty stomach. There's no coffee to jumpstart your day, no tea to provide comfort, no eggs to provide protein, and certainly no toast to provide the illusion of civilization. Instead, you're presented with a bowl of porridge made from coarse grain that's been simmering in a pot for days, slowly transforming from food into something that resembles wallpaper paste with delusions of edibility. This porridge tastes like sadness mixed with grit, seasoned with desperation, and served with a side of resignation. To wash down this culinary nightmare, you drink weak beer. not because you're an alcoholic, but because the water is contaminated with bacteria that would kill you faster than the witch trials. This beer is barely alcoholic, more like liquid bread than anything that would provide intoxication or comfort. It's safer than water, but that's about the only positive thing you can say about it. Your workday starts at dawn and ends at dusk, 6 days a week, with no vacation days, no sick leave, no personal days, and no retirement plan except death. This is how you start every single day, cold, hungry, dirty, uncomfortable, and already exhausted before the real work begins. Your body aches from sleeping on straw, your stomach growls from inadequate nutrition, your skin itches from unwashed clothes and insect bites, and your spirit is slowly being crushed by the relentless grind of survival. And this is during the peaceful time, before the witch trials really begin, before paranoia and suspicion transform your already miserable existence into something that would make Dante's Inferno seem like a vacation resort. This is your baseline level of misery, the foundation upon which the horrors of 1692 will be built. Congratulations, you're a farmer. Not by choice, mind you, but because 90% of the population works in agriculture, and career counselling consists of looking around and realising that food doesn't magically appear on tables. There's no following your dreams, no pursuing your passion, no finding yourself through meaningful work. Your career is determined by the simple, brutal fact that everyone needs to eat, and someone has to grow the food, and that someone is you. Your workday begins before dawn, when the world is still dark and cold, and your body is screaming for more sleep. It ends after sunset, when you're so exhausted that you can barely stumble back to your one-room palace. There are no weekends in the modern sense, no vacation days, no sick leave, no personal time, and no retirement except death. You work 6 days a week, and on the 7th day, you attend church for several hours before doing all the essential chores that couldn't wait for Monday. Your farming tools are marvels of primitive technology that would make a modern gardener weep with frustration. Your plough is essentially a sharpened stick attached to a wooden frame, designed more by hope than engineering principles. It barely scratches the surface of soil that's more rock than dirt, requiring you to push and pull with the strength of an ox, which you don't have because you're slowly starving on a diet of porridge and desperation. Your hoe is a dull piece of iron attached to a wooden handle that splinters your hands and blisters your palms. Your sickle is about as effective at cutting grain as a butter knife would be at performing surgery. The soil you're trying to farm is a geological nightmare, a thin layer of dirt spread over an endless supply of rocks that seem to multiply overnight, like some sort of mineral reproduction system. Every spring, you spend weeks picking rocks out of your fields, creating stone walls that serve as monuments to your futile struggle against geology. You pile these rocks along the edges of your property, creating boundaries that will outlast your house, your family, and probably your entire bloodline. Your farming technique, if it can be called that, involves clearing forest, farming the land until the soil is completely exhausted, then moving on to clear more forest. You're part farmer, part lumberjack, part construction worker, and part environmental destroyer, though the concept of environmental destruction won't be invented for another few centuries. You spend months cutting down trees with hand tools that would make a modern lumberjack laugh, then removing the stumps with nothing but muscle power, determination, and a complete lack of alternatives. The crops you grow are chosen for their ability to keep you alive rather than their taste, nutritional value, or culinary potential. Corn, beans, and squash form the holy trinity of colonial agriculture, not because they're delicious, but because they're hardy, they store well, and they provide the basic nutrients needed to prevent immediate death. Planting is a race against time and weather, with no weather forecast, no irrigation system, and no fertilizer except animal waste that you spread by hand while trying not to think about what you're actually doing. Summer means endless hours of weeding by hand under a sun that seems personally committed to making your life miserable. There are no herbicides, no mechanical cultivators, no shortcuts of any kind. You crawl through your fields on hands and knees, pulling weeds one by one, while insects feast on your exposed skin and the sun slowly cooks your brain. Harvest time determines whether your family eats or starves during the coming winter, adding a level of pressure that would make a modern farmer's stress seem like a minor inconvenience. If you're fortunate enough to actually have a harvest, you must then process and preserve your crops without the benefit of modern equipment, refrigeration, or food preservation techniques. Corn must be husked by hand, shelled by hand, and ground into meal using a hand-cranked mill that requires the upper body strength of a professional wrestler. Vegetables must be dried, salted, or fermented using techniques passed down through generations of people who are just trying not to die of starvation. You also raise livestock, though calling these creatures livestock is generous. Your animals are scrawny, disease-prone beasts that require constant attention and provide minimal return on investment. Your cow, if you're lucky enough to own one, gives maybe a gallon of milk per day if she's healthy, well-fed, and in a good mood, which she rarely is because she's living in the same miserable conditions as you. Caring for animals means being a veterinarian without any knowledge of veterinary medicine, performing surgery with sharp objects, and serving as midwife to creatures that outweigh you by several £100s. Your pigs are essentially garbage disposals with legs, eating kitchen scraps, waste, and anything else they can find while growing into dirty, aggressive beasts that would happily eat you if given the opportunity. Slaughtering a pig requires skill, strength, and a stomach strong enough to handle the sight, sound, and smell of turning a living animal into winter food supply. The process involves techniques that would make a modern butcher faint and create smells that linger in your memory long after the meat is gone. Your chickens are like flying rats with delusions of grandeur, laying eggs sporadically and in locations that require detective work to discover. They're constantly threatened by foxes, hawks, weasels, and various other predators that view your chicken coop as a convenient fast food restaurant. Keeping chickens alive through a New England winter is a full-time job that requires vigilance, luck, and the ability to outsmart creatures that are, frankly, not very intelligent to begin with. If you're a woman, your job description is even more complicated and demanding. In addition to all the farming responsibilities, you're also responsible for cooking, cleaning, childcare, textile production, food preservation, medical care, and whatever else needs doing, because the concept of gender equality won't be invented for another few centuries. You spin wool into thread, weave thread into cloth, and sew cloth into clothing using techniques that require years to master and produce results that would make modern sweatshop conditions seem luxurious. Cooking is a dangerous, time-consuming process that requires constant attention and involves working over an open fire using iron pots that weigh more than you do. There's no temperature control, no timer, no cookbook, and no margin for error. You learn by trial and error often means burned food, food poisoning, or setting yourself on fire. The kitchen is wherever you can fit a fire and some pots, usually in the same room where you sleep, eat, and live, creating a constant risk of accidental immolation. Your ingredients are limited to what you can grow, preserve, or trade for, which means your culinary repertoire consists of variations on the theme of how to make bland food slightly less bland. Salt is expensive, sugar is a luxury reserved for the wealthy, and spices are for people who have money to waste on frivolous things like flavour. Most of your food is seasoned with desperation and served with a side of gratitude that you have anything to eat at all. Children start working as soon as they can walk because childhood is a luxury that farming families simply can't afford. A 5-year-old can collect eggs and feed chickens. By age 10, they're doing adult work because there's no one else to do it, and survival doesn't wait for people to grow up. There's no school, no playtime, no toys except for scraps of wood that children carve into crude approximations of adult tools. Your schedule is determined entirely by the sun and the seasons, with no consideration for your personal preferences, energy levels, or desire for leisure time. Summer means 16-hour workdays that leave you so exhausted you can barely eat before collapsing into sleep. Winter provides a brief respite from outdoor work, but then you're busy repairing tools, processing food, making clothing, and doing all the indoor tasks that you postponed during the growing season. There are no sick days in colonial farming. If you're ill, you work anyway because the crops don't care about your health and the animals still need feeding. If you're injured, you work around it because there's no one else to take over your responsibilities. If you're pregnant, you work until labor begins and return to work as soon as you can stand because survival doesn't pause for childbirth. The economic reality of colonial farming is that you're always one disaster away from starvation. A bad harvest, a sick animal, an injury, or even just a particularly harsh winter can destroy your family's survival prospects. There's no insurance, no safety net, no government assistance, and no backup plan. You succeed or you die, and success is measured not by profit or comfort, but by the simple fact that your family survives another year. This backbreaking, dangerous, barely profitable work is considered the good life in 1692 Salem village. Farmers own land, which makes them respectable members of society. They produce food, which makes them essential to community survival. They're independent, which means they're not beholden to employers or landlords, though they're completely dependent on weather, soil, and luck. But independence comes at a cost that would make modern people reconsider their romantic notions about self-sufficiency. You're responsible for everything: your family's survival, your animal's health, your crop's success, your tool's maintenance, your home's upkeep, and your community's expectations. There's no one to blame when things go wrong, no help when you're overwhelmed, and no one to take over when you're too old or sick to continue. This is your career until you die, which will probably be sooner rather than later, given the physical demands and health hazards of colonial life. There's no promotion, no advancement, no career change, and no escape. You're a farmer, and you'll die a farmer, and the best you can hope for is that you'll produce enough food to keep your family alive for another year, and maybe, if you're very lucky, leave your children a slightly better piece of land than the one you inherited. And this is all happening before the witch trials begin, when even this miserable existence will seem like paradise compared to what's coming. After backbreaking labor, you might think it's time to relax. You'd be wrong. The concept of leisure time is as foreign as indoor plumbing. Welcome to Puritan society, where fun goes to die and suspicion is the primary entertainment. Your social calendar revolves around church, a stark, unheated building where you spend hours listening to sermons about your sinfulness. Church attendance is legally required. Failure to attend results in fines, punishment, or worse. You attend twice on Sunday and often during the week. The church building reflects Puritan values, deliberately uncomfortable and devoid of beauty. No decorations, stained glass, or comfortable seating. Just hard wooden benches facing a pulpit where the minister explains why you're going to hell. Seating is arranged by social hierarchy. Wealthy merchants sit in front, poor farmers in back. Women sit separately from men because even in worship, the sexes can't be trusted together. Sermons last for hours, delivered by ministers who believe brevity shows insufficient devotion. Church isn't just worship, it's community surveillance. Everyone observes everyone else, noting who's present, judging clothing and behavior, gathering gossip that keeps colonial society functioning. You're watched constantly, evaluated continuously, judged harshly for any deviation. The Puritan concept of community means everyone is responsible for everyone else's moral behavior. Your neighbors are unpaid moral police whose job is monitoring your conduct and reporting suspicious activity. Privacy isn't just unavailable, it's actively discouraged. Social gatherings outside church are rare and heavily regulated. No parties, dances, festivals, or celebrations that might lead to enjoyment. Puritans believe idle hands are the devil's workshop, so any non-practical activity is viewed with suspicion. Even weddings and funerals are somber affairs. The closest thing to entertainment is public punishment, serving as both deterrent and spectacle. The town square features a pillory where offenders are locked in wooden stocks, enduring ridicule and abuse. There's a whipping post for public flogging and a ducking stool for punishing outspoken women. These public punishments are community events, drawing crowds who come to witness justice and remind themselves of consequences. Children attend as educational experiences, learning early that deviation results in humiliation and pain. The legal system blends English common law with Puritan religious doctrine, administered by magistrates more concerned with moral purity than legal precedent. Crimes include theft, assault, adultery, blasphemy, working on Sabbath, and failing to attend church. Punishments are designed to be painful and humiliating. Marriage is not romantic union, but practical arrangement designed to create stable households and produce children. Courtship is heavily supervised, with parents selecting suitable partners. Love is a pleasant bonus if it develops, but not required. The marriage ceremony is a civil contract performed by a magistrate, not a minister. This reflects Puritan belief that marriage is social institution rather than spiritual sacrament. The ceremony is brief and businesslike, followed by modest celebration. Once married, couples are expected to produce children quickly and frequently. Children are both blessing and economic necessity. Large families are normal because children provide labor and old age security. Infant mortality is high, so couples have many children hoping some survive. Women occupy a peculiar position combining theoretical respect with practical subjugation. They're considered morally superior, but intellectually inferior and legally dependent. A woman's identity is defined by her relationship to men: father's daughter, husband's wife, son's mother. The social hierarchy is rigid and clearly defined based on wealth, family background, church membership, and moral reputation. At the top are wealthy merchants and landowners controlling government and church. Below are small farmers and craftsmen owning property but lacking power. At bottom are landless labourers, servants, and slaves with no rights. Social mobility is virtually non-existent. You're born into a class and die in that class unless you marry above your station or fall into disgrace. The idea of improving circumstances through hard work is foreign to a society believing social position is God's will. Gossip is the primary communication and entertainment, serving as news network and social control. Information travels quickly, often becoming distorted. Reputations can be made or destroyed by whispered conversations. Rumors have power to ruin lives. Gossip networks are dominated by women who have few other outlets for social interaction and political influence. They gather at wells, markets, and church to exchange information about neighbours, discussing everything from marital problems to suspicious behaviour. Education is limited and heavily focused on religious instruction. Most children learn to read using the Bible. Writing is less important than reading. Arithmetic is taught only for basic commerce. Higher education is reserved for boys destined for ministry. Books are rare and expensive. Most households own only a Bible and perhaps other religious texts. Literacy rates are higher than many places, but still limited, especially among women and poor. Reading ability is important for spiritual development, but critical thinking is discouraged. Recreation, when it exists, is limited to activities serving practical purposes or promoting moral development. Men might discuss farming techniques, but these are more like town meetings than social events. Women might gather for quilting, but these are work sessions rather than social occasions. Children's play is limited to activities preparing them for adult responsibilities. Boys play with miniature farming tools. Girls play with dolls and household items. Toys are simple and homemade, carved from wood or sewn from fabric scraps. This is your social world, a community where everyone knows everyone's business, where deviation is punished severely, where entertainment consists of watching neighbours suffer, and where primary social activity is sitting in an unheated building listening to lectures about moral failings. This oppressive environment is about to become the breeding ground for mass hysteria. The same surveillance that keeps everyone in line will become the mechanism for accusations. The same gossip networks will spread witchcraft rumours. The same public punishments will become public executions. In Salem Village, 1692, your social life isn't just boring and oppressive, it's about to become deadly. Now we arrive at the main event. It's January 1692, and something strange is happening in Reverend Samuel Parris's household. His 9-year-old daughter Betty and 11-year-old niece Abigail Williams have begun exhibiting behaviours that will plunge the community into nightmare. The girls' symptoms begin innocuously with what might today be recognised as childhood restlessness. But in a Puritan community where children must be perfectly obedient, these behaviours quickly alarm adults. Betty and Abigail start having fits, screaming, throwing objects, contorting their bodies, and speaking strangely. Imagine being a child in this environment where every aspect of life is controlled by adults who believe children are born sinful. You spend days in a cold, dark house, listening to lectures about hellfire with no toys, games, or outlets for natural energy. Is it surprising some children might develop symptoms? But adults don't understand child psychology. They interpret these behaviours through religious beliefs, including firm conviction that the devil constantly seeks to corrupt innocent souls, especially children not yet fully indoctrinated. Local doctor William Griggs examines the girls and, after ruling out physical causes, delivers a diagnosis that will echo through history. The girls suffer from the evil hand, 17th century terminology for supernatural affliction. They've been bewitched. This diagnosis transforms a family problem into community crisis. If the devil is active in Salem Village, targeting the minister's household, no one is safe. The community that has spent years watching each other for moral deviation now has confirmation their vigilance was justified. Pressure on Betty and Abigail to identify their tormentors is enormous. Adults surround them constantly, demanding to know who is causing their afflictions. The girls, children dealing with adult attention they can't understand, eventually provide the names their interrogators seek. On February 29th, 1692, the girls accuse three women, Tituba, an enslaved Caribbean woman in the Paris household, Sarah Good, a homeless beggar, and Sarah Osborne, an elderly woman involved in property disputes. These women represent perfect targets, marginal community members lacking social protection. Tituba is obvious target because she's an outsider, a woman of colour whose cultural background includes folk practices Puritans consider demonic. She's been telling stories to children, sharing Caribbean heritage that includes beliefs about spirits and magic. In a community viewing non-Christian practices as devil worship, Tituba's knowledge makes her automatically suspect. Sarah Good is targeted because she's poor, homeless, and dependent on charity from resentful neighbours. She's been asking for food and shelter, and when refused, she mutters as she walks away. In a community where unusual behaviour is viewed with suspicion, Sarah's poverty and talking to herself make her an easy target. Sarah Osborne is accused because she's been involved in property disputes, married her former indentured servant, and hasn't attended church regularly. In Puritan society, any of these behaviours would attract suspicion. The combination makes her a prime candidate. The three women are arrested and brought before magistrates Jonathan Corwin and John Hathorne for public examinations in the packed meeting house. The examinations reveal fundamental unfairness of witchcraft prosecutions. The accused are presumed guilty from the start. Questions are designed to elicit confessions, not determine innocence. Sarah Good and Sarah Osborne maintain innocence, insisting they've never practiced witchcraft. Their denials are taken as evidence of guilt because everyone knows witches lie. Their protestations only convince magistrates and spectators they're dealing with cunning practitioners of dark arts. But Tituba takes a different approach. Perhaps recognizing denial leads to severe punishment, perhaps hoping to save her life, or perhaps telling interrogators what they want to hear, she confesses to practicing witchcraft. Her confession is everything the Puritan community has waited to hear. Tituba describes elaborate devil worship scenes, a tall man in black carrying a book for witches to sign, red cats and black dogs as supernatural messengers flying through air to attend meetings. She admits signing the devil's book and claims other witches in Salem village are working to destroy the community. Her confession is both relief and terror. It's relief because it confirms their fears and validates their beliefs, proving vigilance against evil was justified. But it's terror because it suggests the three arrested women are just the beginning of a larger conspiracy. The afflicted girls continue having fits, and symptoms seem to worsen during examinations. They writhe in apparent agony when accused women look at them, claim to see invisible spirits attacking them, and provide detailed descriptions of supernatural torments only they can perceive. The community's response reveals deep tensions building in Salem village for years. This is a community under stress from political uncertainty, economic hardship, religious conflict, and social change. The witch trials provide an outlet for these tensions, explaining problems and identifying enemies. Accusations quickly spread beyond the original three women. Ann Putnam Jr., a 12-year-old from a prominent family, begins having similar fits and making additional accusations. Other children and young women start exhibiting symptoms. The circle of accusers grows, and with it, the circle of accused. Martha Corey, a respected church member, becomes the next target. Her case is shocking because she's not marginal like the first three. She's a full church member of good reputation. Her accusation sends shockwaves because it suggests anyone, even seemingly pious citizens, could be secretly practicing witchcraft. Even more shocking is the accusation against 4-year-old Dorothy Good, Sarah Good's daughter. The idea that such a young child could practice witchcraft challenges Puritan understanding, but afflicted girls insist little Dorothy is tormenting them. The child is arrested and imprisoned, becoming the youngest person ever accused in colonial America. As accusations multiply, the community fractures along lines of suspicion and fear. Neighbors who lived peacefully for years start viewing each other with distrust. Old grudges and property disputes take on new significance as potential motives for supernatural revenge. The legal system proves inadequate to handle the crisis. Magistrates have no experience with witchcraft cases, no established procedures for evaluating supernatural evidence, and no understanding of psychological factors influencing accusers. They rely on folk beliefs, biblical references, and their own prejudices. Spectral evidence becomes central to prosecutions. This is the idea that the devil can assume innocent people's shapes and use their spectral forms to commit evil acts. Afflicted girls claim to see accused women's specters attacking them, and these visions are accepted as valid evidence. This creates an impossible situation for the accused. How do you defend against charges of crimes only certain people can see? How do you prove your spectral form hasn't been flying around tormenting children? The nature of spectral evidence makes it impossible to disprove, meaning accusation becomes equivalent to conviction. By spring 1692, the witch hunt has taken on a life of its own. What began as concern for two afflicted children has become a community-wide crisis, threatening to destroy Salem village from within. Accusations continue spreading, the circle of accused continues growing, and the legal system prepares for formal trials that will result in 19 executions. This is how quickly a community can descend into madness, how easily fear can overcome reason, how rapidly neighbors can become enemies. The witch trials represent one of the darkest chapters in American history, a reminder of what happens when prejudice, superstition, and mass hysteria override justice and common sense. And you would have been right in the middle of it all, trying to navigate a world where anyone could be accused, where any unusual behavior could be interpreted as witchcraft evidence, and where your survival might depend on your ability to conform and avoid attracting attention. The witch hunt has begun, and no one in Salem village is safe. Now that paranoia has infected Salem village, let's discuss how you, a modern person, would almost certainly find yourself accused of witchcraft. Your complete innocence would work against you because in a community convinced witches are everywhere, normal behavior becomes suspicious and unusual behavior becomes damning evidence. Your modern habits and knowledge would be your downfall. You've spent your life in a world of science and rational thinking, and these advantages would become liabilities. Your basic understanding of hygiene, medicine, and natural processes would mark you as suspiciously knowledgeable about mysterious things. You know that washing hands prevents disease, certain plants have medicinal properties, and weather follows predictable patterns. In 1692, this knowledge would seem unnaturally wise. When you suggest people might get sick less if they washed hands more, neighbors would wonder how you know so much about preventing illness. When you correctly predict rain based on cloud formations, they'd wonder how you foretell the future. Your vocabulary alone would attract suspicion. You use words and phrases that won't be invented for centuries, reference concepts that don't exist in Puritan theology, and express ideas challenging fundamental assumptions. When you accidentally mention bacteria, electricity, or psychology, neighbors would assume you're speaking in tongues or communicating with supernatural entities. Your body language and social habits would mark you as different. You're accustomed to making eye contact, shaking shaking hands with both genders, and expressing opinions freely, regardless of social status. In Puritan society, these behaviors would be interpreted as dangerous independence and lack of proper submission to authority. Your knowledge of the human body would be especially problematic. You understand basic anatomy, know that mental illness has physical causes, and are aware many medical conditions have natural explanations. When someone develops symptoms locals attribute to supernatural causes, your rational explanations would be seen as evidence you have special knowledge of how the devil works. Your eating habits would attract attention. You're accustomed to varied diet with foods unavailable in colonial Massachusetts. Your knowledge of nutrition would seem supernatural to people who believe food is simply body fuel. When you suggest eating certain foods might prevent scurvy or drinking milk might strengthen bones, neighbors would wonder how you know about mysterious connections between food and health. Your personal hygiene would be both admirable and suspicious. You're accustomed to bathing regularly, brushing teeth, and keeping clothes clean, habits making you stand out dramatically. Your insistence on cleanliness would be interpreted as vanity or pride, both sinful. Worse, your knowledge of making soap, purifying water, and preventing infections would suggest supernatural powers over disease. Your reaction to the witch trials would probably seal your fate. You'd be horrified by lack of due process, acceptance of spectral evidence, and willingness to execute people based on children's testimony. Your attempts to introduce concepts like burden of proof, presumption of innocence, and rational evidence evaluation would be seen as attempts to protect other witches. Your religious knowledge would work against you. You know too much about Christianity for someone who hasn't studied theology, and too little about Puritan doctrine for someone claiming to be faithful. Your familiarity with other religions and tolerant attitude toward different beliefs would be seen as evidence you're in league with the devil. Your gender would significantly impact your accusation chances. If you're a woman, you'd be automatically more suspect because women are considered more susceptible to devil's influence. Your independence, knowledge, and willingness to speak your mind would be interpreted as signs you've rejected your proper role as submissive helpmate. If you're a man, you'd have some gender protection, but your unusual knowledge and behavior would still make you suspect. Men accused of witchcraft typically challenge authority, possess unusual skills, or are involved in neighbor disputes. Your modern attitudes toward women's rights, religious tolerance, and social equality would put you in conflict with community leaders. Your economic status would influence vulnerability. If you're poor, you'd be an easy target because poor people have no social protection. If you're wealthy, you'd be tempting because successful prosecution would allow accusers to seize your property. Modest prosperity might offer some protection, but not much. Your age would be another factor. Young people are often among accusers rather than accused, but they're vulnerable if seen as too independent. Middle-aged people are prime targets because they're old enough to have accumulated enemies, but not old enough to be dismissed as harmless. Elderly people are vulnerable because they're seen as closer to death and more likely to have made devil pacts. Your family relationships would impact accusation chances. If you have children, your parenting style would attract attention because you treat children with more kindness than considered appropriate. Your reluctance to use physical punishment, encouragement of children's curiosity, and willingness to answer questions would be seen as corrupting young minds. Your medical knowledge would be particularly dangerous. You know many diseases have natural causes and can be treated with proper care. Knowledge seeming supernatural to people believing illness is either God's punishment or devil's attack. Your ability to treat injuries, understanding of infection spread, and knowledge of medicinal plants would be interpreted as supernatural powers. Your technological knowledge would mark you as suspect. You understand how simple machines work, know basic physics and chemistry principles, and are familiar with concepts like leverage and combustion. In a world where most believe natural phenomena are controlled by supernatural forces, your ability to explain how things work would seem like special knowledge granted by the devil. Your social attitudes would put you in constant conflict with community norms. Your belief in equality, tolerance for different opinions, and respect for individual rights would be seen as dangerous ideas threatening social order. Your reluctance to participate in public punishments, sympathy for accused, and criticism of the legal system would be interpreted as evidence you're protecting other witches. Even your dreams would be evidence against you. In a world where dreams are considered spiritual messages, your modern understanding of sleep would seem supernatural. Your ability to remember and interpret dreams, knowledge that dreams reflect psychological states rather than spiritual communications, and rational approach to dream analysis would be seen as evidence of special powers. Your very presence in Salem Village would be suspicious. You'd be a stranger with no family connections, established reputation, or clear reason for being in the community. Strangers are always suspect, and in crisis times, they become convenient scapegoats. The irony is that your innocence would work against you. You'd have no experience with subtle social dynamics of accusation and defense, no understanding of how to navigate complex community relationships, and no knowledge of unwritten survival rules in mass hysteria. Your honest responses would be interpreted as either naive or cunning, and either interpretation would support witchcraft accusations. In the end, you'd be accused not because you're practicing witchcraft, but because you're different, because you know too much, because you challenge assumptions, and because you represent everything the Puritan community fears about change and progress. Your modern knowledge, rational thinking, and humanitarian values would all be twisted into evidence of supernatural evil. And once accused, your fate would be sealed, because in Salem Village, 1692, accusation equals conviction, and conviction leads inevitably to the gallows. Congratulations, you've been accused of witchcraft. Perhaps you predicted weather correctly, suggested hand-washing might prevent illness, or just looked at someone wrong during church. Whatever the trigger, you're now facing the colonial justice system, and it's not interested in justice. Your troubles begin with a complaint filed by afflicted girls or their families. There's no investigation, evidence gathering, or verification. Someone pointed a finger claiming your spectral form has been tormenting them, and that's sufficient grounds for action. Accusation equals probable cause, and probable cause equals guilt. The constable arrives at your door early morning with several men, because arresting a suspected witch is considered dangerous work requiring backup. They don't knock politely or present a warrant. They enter your home and inform you that you're under arrest for witchcraft. You're not read rights because rights haven't been invented. You're not told you can remain silent because self-incrimination protection doesn't exist. You're not informed you have right to attorney because there are no defense attorneys. You're simply told you're accused and need to come immediately for examination. Your family isn't allowed to accompany you, and they're not given information about when, where, or what will happen. They're left wondering if they'll see you again, and whether they'll be next accused, because guilt by association is very real. You're taken to Salem Village Meeting House, the same building where you've endured countless sermons about moral failings. But now, instead of congregation member, you're the main attraction. The suspected witch examined before the entire community. The meeting house is packed with spectators who've come to witness good versus evil confrontation. The examination is conducted by magistrates Jonathan Corwin and John Hathorne, men with no legal training, no witchcraft experience, and no interest in determining innocence. They've already decided you're guilty. Examination is simply formality designed to extract confession and identify accomplices. Questions aren't designed to establish facts, but to trap you into admitting guilt. If you hesitate or seem nervous, that's guilt evidence. If you answer confidently, that's also guilt evidence, because witches are known to be bold. There's literally no way to answer without providing evidence against yourself. Magistrates ask not whether you're a witch, but why you're tormenting afflicted children. This loaded question assumes guilt and asks only for crime details. If you deny accusations, you're called a liar. If you admit them, you're confirming guilt. If you remain silent, silence is interpreted as guilt admission. Throughout examination, afflicted girls are present, providing running commentary on your supernatural activities. They claim to see your spectral form attacking them, writhe in apparent agony when you look their direction, and provide detailed descriptions of torments you're inflicting. Their performances are dramatic and convincing. Spectral evidence means you're accused of crimes only certain people can see. Girls claim your spirit has left your body and is flying around attacking innocent people. The fact that you were physically present elsewhere when alleged attacks occurred is irrelevant because your spirit can apparently be in multiple places simultaneously. You try pointing out logical inconsistencies, but logic isn't welcome. When you ask how your spirit can attack people while your body sits in court, you're told the devil has given you supernatural powers allowing multiple location presence. When you point out no physical evidence exists, you're told witchcraft leaves no traces because it operates spiritually. Magistrates are particularly interested in getting you to confess because confessions serve multiple purposes. They validate proceedings by proving witches really exist and threaten the community. They provide information about other suspected witches, allowing authorities to expand investigations. They offer possibility of mercy for those cooperating. Confession pressure is enormous. You're told confession is the only way to save your soul, that God will forgive you if you admit sins and repent. You're told other accused witches have already confessed and implicated you, so denial is pointless. You're told confession might save your life, while continued denial will certainly lead to execution. But confession comes with problems. If you confess to practicing witchcraft, you're admitting to a capital crime carrying death penalty. You're also expected to provide details about supernatural activities, name other witches who worked with you, and demonstrate repentance by cooperating fully. Confession doesn't guarantee mercy, it simply changes your legal jeopardy nature. Examination can last hours, with magistrates asking same questions repeatedly in different forms, hoping to catch contradictions or trick you into guilt admission. You're not allowed to sit given food or water or permitted to consult anyone who might advise response. Physical courtroom conditions are deliberately intimidating. You're standing before hostile spectators, facing magistrates convinced of your guilt, while afflicted girls writhe and scream nearby. The atmosphere is charged with fear, anger, and religious fervor, creating psychological pressure difficult for anyone to withstand. Your responses are scrutinized for supernatural influence signs. If you remain calm, that's evidence the devil is protecting you. If you become upset, that's evidence of guilty conscience. If you answer directly, you're being defiant. If you hesitate, you're trying to think of lies. Examination concludes with magistrates deciding whether there's sufficient evidence to hold you for trial. Since evidence standard is non-existent and magistrates are predisposed to believe accusations, this decision is foregone conclusion. You're ordered held in jail pending formal trial and led away in chains while spectators discuss your obvious guilt. Your journey to jail is public spectacle, with crowds lining streets to see the captured witch. Some throw objects, others shout curses, and a few make the sign of the cross for protection. You're no longer community member, you're dangerous enemy who must be contained and destroyed. Jail is a nightmare, making modern prison seem like luxury resort. Its small, dark building with stone walls, dirt floors, and no heating or sanitation. Cells are overcrowded with other accused witches, creating a community of condemned sharing fears, stories, and dwindling hopes. Jail conditions are deliberately harsh, designed to encourage confessions and break spirits. You're chained to walls to prevent escape, though escape would be impossible given community hostility. You're fed minimal, poor-quality food and charged for imprisonment privilege because even incarceration is business. Other prisoners include people from all walks of life: farmers, merchants, church members, even children. Some maintain innocence, others have confessed hoping to save lives, and a few have been driven to madness. Jail conversations reveal accusation, arbitrariness, and complete community social fabric breakdown. While you're in jail, formal legal proceedings continue without you. A grand jury reviews evidence, which consists primarily of afflicted girls' testimony and confessions extracted from other accused witches. Grand jury's job isn't determining guilt or innocence, but deciding whether enough evidence exists to justify formal trial. Grand jury proceedings are formality because same magistrates who conducted your examination are involved, and they've already decided you're guilty. Grand jury returns indictment charging you with witchcraft, and your case is scheduled for trial before Court of Oyer and Termina, a special court established specifically for witchcraft cases. Your trial is even more of a sham than examination. You're brought before judges convinced of your guilt before proceedings begin. You have no attorney, no opportunity to cross-examine witnesses, and no right to present defense evidence. Trial is simply opportunity for prosecution to present its case and for you to confess crimes. Prosecution's case consists entirely of spectral evidence and afflicted girls' testimony. There's no physical evidence, corroborating witnesses, or rational explanation for how you could have committed alleged crimes. But in Salem witch trials, rational explanation isn't required. Supernatural explanation is sufficient. Your fate is sealed before trial begins because the legal system has been designed to produce convictions, not determine truth. Judges, jury, and spectators all expect you to be found guilty, and they interpret any evidence in your favor as proof of supernatural cunning. The verdict is inevitable. Guilty of witchcraft, punishable by death. You're sentenced to hang and return to jail to await execution, joining growing numbers of condemned witches who will soon meet their fate on Gallows Hill. This is justice in Salem Village, 1692, a system designed to confirm suspicions rather than establish truth, to punish difference rather than protect innocence, and to serve community need for scapegoats rather than commitment to fairness. Here you are, sitting in a colonial jail that makes medieval dungeons look luxurious, awaiting execution for witchcraft. You've been convicted based on children's testimony about invisible spirits, denied meaningful legal representation, and are about to become part of one of America's darkest chapters. Your final days in jail are a study in human misery and institutional cruelty. Conditions that were barely tolerable during pre-trial detention become actively torturous as execution approaches. You're kept in chains not just to prevent escape, but to constantly remind you of your condemned status. Food becomes even more meager as your execution date approaches. There's a practical reason. Why waste resources on someone about to die? But there's also psychological reason. Authorities want you to suffer, to experience full weight of divine and human justice before meeting your maker. Other condemned prisoners around you represent a cross-section of Salem Village society, united only by shared fate. There's Rebecca Nurse, a 71-year-old grandmother whose only crime was being involved in a property dispute. There's John Proctor, a farmer who criticized the witch trials. There's Martha Corey, whose skeptical attitude marked her as a witch. These aren't evil sorcerers of popular imagination. They're ordinary colonists who found themselves on the wrong side of mass hysteria, victims of personal grudges, property disputes, and social tensions transformed into supernatural accusations. Some prisoners maintain innocence to the end, refusing to confess to crimes they didn't commit, even when confession might save lives. Others break under pressure and confess, hoping cooperation will result in mercy. A few are driven to madness by stress and horror. The confession situation's irony becomes clear as you await execution. Those who confess to witchcraft are often spared because their confessions validate proceedings and provide information about other suspected witches. Those who maintain innocence are executed because their denials are interpreted as continued allegiance to the devil. Your family members, if they haven't fled or been accused themselves, are allowed occasional supervised visits. They're not permitted to bring food, clothing, or comfort items because such kindness might be interpreted as witchcraft support. They're also not allowed to discuss your case or offer advice. The psychological torture of awaiting execution is compounded by uncertainty about when it will occur. Executions are scheduled based on court convenience and hangman availability, not consideration for condemned prisoners. You might wait days or weeks, never knowing whether each sunrise will be your last. Religious pressure intensifies as execution approaches. Ministers visit regularly, not to provide comfort, but to extract final confessions and ensure you die repentant. They're convinced your soul is in mortal danger and see execution as opportunity for last-minute salvation if you'll admit crimes and beg God's forgiveness. These ministerial visits are exercises in theological intimidation, with clergy using authority and your fear of damnation to pressure confession. They describe in vivid detail the torments awaiting unrepentant sinners in hell. Contrasting these horrors with mercy, God might show those who confess and demonstrate genuine repentance. The day of execution arrives with little fanfare. You're awakened before dawn, given a final meal of bread and water, and allowed brief period for prayer and reflection. Ministers make one last attempt to extract confession, promising that even at this late hour, God's mercy is available. You're loaded onto a cart with other condemned prisoners, beginning the journey to Gallows Hill, the rocky outcropping outside Salem town where executions take place. The cart ride is public spectacle, with crowds lining the route for a final look at condemned witches. Gallows Hill is a barren, windswept place that seems designed by nature to serve as execution site. The gallows is a simple wooden structure built for function rather than appearance, with a platform large enough for multiple executions and crossbeam strong enough to support several bodies. The crowd gathering for execution is enormous, including people from Salem Village, Salem Town, and surrounding communities who've come to witness the final act. Executions are public events, serving both as entertainment and moral instruction. Spectators come to see justice done, witness evil's punishment, and remind themselves of sin's consequences. The execution procedure is designed to maximize both condemned physical suffering and psychological impact on spectators. You're forced to climb gallows steps, where you're given one final opportunity to confess crimes and save your soul. Ministers make one last appeal for repentance, and the crowd waits to see whether you'll break down and admit guilt. If you maintain innocence to the end, as most Salem victims do, Your refusal to confess is interpreted by the crowd as evidence of continued devil allegiance. Spectators see your courage not as innocence proof, but as demonstration of supernatural protection. Your dignity becomes guilt evidence. Your bravery becomes proof of evil nature. The actual hanging is brutal affair bearing no resemblance to quick, clean executions depicted in movies. Colonial hangings are designed to cause death by strangulation rather than neck breaking, meaning you'll die slowly and painfully while the crowd watches. Spectators watch your death throes with satisfaction, horror, and religious fervor. They see your suffering as divine justice being served, as God's punishment for crimes against the community. Your death validates their beliefs about witchcraft reality and trial necessity. Your body is left hanging as warning to others, then cut down and buried in unmarked grave. There's no funeral service, mourning period, or recognition of your humanity or innocence. You're simply disposed of like refuse, your life and death serving as cautionary tale about challenging community norms. But here's the tragic irony. Even as you're being executed for witchcraft, the witch trials are beginning to collapse under their own contradictions. Accusations have spread so widely, they're threatening prominent community members, including the governor's wife. Reliance on spectral evidence is being questioned by leading ministers. By October 1692, just months after your execution, the court of Oye and Terminer is dissolved and replaced by a new court refusing to accept spectral evidence. Remaining accused, witches are either acquitted or pardoned, and witch trials come to an end as suddenly as they began. In following years, many people involved express regret. Some accusers admit they fabricated charges, some judges acknowledge errors, and some spectators recognize they were caught up in mass hysteria. The Massachusetts legislature eventually passes a bill reversing convictions and providing compensation to victims' families. But these apologies come too late for you and 18 others executed during Salem witch trials. You died not because you were guilty of witchcraft, but because you lived in a community that had lost its ability to distinguish between reality and fantasy, between justice and vengeance, between protecting innocent and punishing different. Your death serves as reminder of how quickly civilized society can descend into barbarism, how easily fear can overcome reason, and how dangerous it is to abandon due process and presumption of innocence principles. Salem witch trials represent one of American history's darkest chapters, when community fears and prejudices were allowed to override commitment to justice and human dignity. The people who killed you weren't monsters. They were ordinary colonists who genuinely believed they were protecting their community from supernatural evil. They were convinced they were doing God's work, serving justice and saving innocent lives by eliminating dangerous witches. Their certainty in righteousness made them capable of incredible cruelty and injustice. This is perhaps Salem witch trials' most frightening lesson, that ordinary people, convinced of their righteousness and driven by fear and prejudice, are capable of extraordinary evil. The witch trials didn't require monsters. They only required a community willing to abandon reason for superstition, justice for expedience, and compassion for fear. Your story ends on Gallows Hill, but Salem Village lessons continue resonating through American history. The witch trials serve as cautionary tale about mass hysteria dangers, due process importance, and need to protect minority rights, even when majority is convinced of its righteousness. In the end, you wouldn't have lasted a day in Salem Village, 1692, not because you were weak or unprepared, but because you were different, because you challenged assumptions, and because you lived in a time and place where being different was a capital crime. And so we reach the end of our journey through Salem Village, 1692, a place and time that serves as a stark reminder of how quickly civilization can unravel when fear replaces reason, when suspicion overcomes compassion, and when mob mentality drowns out individual conscience. You've experienced, through this imaginary but historically grounded journey, what it would have been like to live through one of the darkest chapters in American history. The Salem witch trials weren't an aberration or anomaly. They were the logical conclusion of a perfect storm of social, economic, religious, and psychological factors that created conditions ripe for mass hysteria. The same human tendencies that led to the witch trials, the same capacity for fear-driven irrationality, the same willingness to sacrifice individual rights for perceived collective security. These tendencies exist in every human society, in every historical period, including our own. What makes the Salem witch trials particularly chilling is not their uniqueness, but their familiarity. The patterns of accusation, the breakdown of due process, the willingness to believe extraordinary claims without extraordinary evidence, the tendency to see enemies everywhere and interpret difference as danger. These patterns have repeated themselves throughout history in various forms. The specific details change, but the underlying human dynamics remain remarkably consistent. The people of Salem Village were not evil monsters. They were ordinary human beings caught up in extraordinary circumstances. They were farmers and merchants, parents and children, church members and community leaders who genuinely believed they were protecting their society from real and present danger. Their certainty in their righteousness, their conviction that they were doing God's work, their belief that they were saving innocent lives by eliminating dangerous threats. These beliefs made them capable of committing acts that we now recognize as profoundly unjust and deeply immoral. This is perhaps the most important lesson of the Salem witch trials, that good people, acting with the best of intentions, are capable of doing terrible things when they allow fear to override reason, when they abandon critical thinking in favor of emotional reaction, and when they prioritize group loyalty over individual rights. The witch trials didn't require evil people. They only required frightened people who were willing to sacrifice their principles in the name of security. The victims of the Salem witch trials were not heroes or martyrs in the traditional sense. They were ordinary people who found themselves on the wrong side of mass hysteria. They were farmers and housewives, church members and community leaders, elderly grandmothers and young children who had the misfortune to attract suspicion during a time when suspicion was equivalent to guilt. Their deaths were not noble sacrifices for a great cause. They were senseless tragedies that served no purpose except to satisfy the community's need for scapegoats. But their deaths were not meaningless, because they serve as a permanent reminder of the importance of protecting individual rights, maintaining due process, and preserving the presumption of innocence even when, especially when, the community is convinced of someone's guilt. The Salem witch trials teach us that justice is not about giving the people what they want. It's about protecting the rights of the accused even when those rights are unpopular. The legal principles that we take for granted today, the right to legal representation, the presumption of innocence, the burden of proof on the prosecution, the right to confront accusers, the protection against self-incrimination. These principles were developed in part as a response to tragedies like the Salem witch trials. The founders of the American legal system were well aware of the dangers of mob justice and the importance of protecting minority rights against majority tyranny. But legal protections are only as strong as the people who enforce them. and they can be eroded or abandoned when fear and prejudice become strong enough. The Salem witch trials remind us that constitutional protections and legal safeguards are not self-enforcing. They require constant vigilance and active defense by people who are willing to stand up for principle even when it's unpopular or dangerous to do so. The witch trials also remind us of the importance of critical thinking and scientific reasoning in evaluating extraordinary claims. The people of Salem Village accepted spectral evidence, invisible attacks, and supernatural explanations because they lacked the intellectual tools to evaluate these claims critically. They had no understanding of psychology, no knowledge of mass hysteria, no familiarity with the scientific method, and no tradition of skeptical inquiry. In our modern world, we have access to these intellectual tools, but we don't always use them. We still see periodic outbreaks of mass hysteria, moral panics, and conspiracy theories that spread through communities like wildfire, causing real harm to real people. The specific content of these panics may be different from the witchcraft fears of 1692, but the underlying psychological and social dynamics are remarkably similar. The Salem witch trials also highlight the dangers of religious extremism and the importance of separating church and state. The Puritan theocracy of Massachusetts Bay Colony created a system where religious doctrine became civil law, where moral behavior was legally mandated, and where deviation from religious orthodoxy was punishable by death. This fusion of religious and political authority created conditions that made the witch trials not just possible but inevitable. The separation of church and state, one of the fundamental principles of American democracy, was designed in part to prevent the kind of religious persecution that characterized the Salem witch trials. But this separation is not automatic or permanent. It requires constant vigilance and active defense by people who understand its importance and are willing to fight for it. Perhaps most importantly, the Salem witch trials remind us of the value of tolerance, diversity, and individual freedom. The victims of the witch trials were targeted not because they were actually practicing witchcraft, but because they were different, because they challenged social norms, because they represented change in a community that feared change. Their deaths were the price of a society's inability to tolerate difference and its unwillingness to protect minority rights. In our modern world, we face similar challenges. We live in diverse societies where people hold different beliefs, practice different religions, come from different cultures, and live different lifestyles. The temptation to fear and persecute those who are different from us is as strong today as it was in 1692. The Salem witch trials remind us that this temptation must be resisted, that diversity is a strength rather than a threat, and that protecting the rights of minorities is essential to the health of any democratic society. The witch trials also teach us about the power of fear and the importance of courage in the face of mass hysteria. The few people in Salem Village who spoke out against the trials, who questioned the evidence, who defended the accused, they were the true heroes of this story. They risked their own lives and reputations to stand up for what was right, even when the entire community was against them. Their courage reminds us that it's not enough to simply avoid participating in injustice. We must actively oppose it, even when doing so is difficult or dangerous. The story of Salem Village also illustrates the importance of education and critical thinking in maintaining a free society. The witch trials were possible in part because the people of Salem Village lacked the intellectual tools to evaluate the evidence critically, to question authority effectively, and to resist the pressure of mass hysteria. Education is not just about acquiring knowledge. It's about developing the ability to think independently, to question assumptions, and to resist the temptation to follow the crowd when the crowd is wrong. As you settle back into your modern life, with its central heating and indoor plumbing, its legal protections and scientific understanding, its tolerance for diversity and respect for individual rights, take a moment to appreciate how far we've come since 1692. But also remember how fragile these advances are, how easily they can be lost, and how important it is to defend them against those who would sacrifice freedom for security, justice for expedience, and truth for comfort. The people of Salem Village thought they were creating a godly society, a community of the faithful protected from evil and dedicated to righteousness. Instead, they created a hell on earth, a place where neighbors turned against neighbors, where children accused their elders, where justice became vengeance, and where fear ruled over reason. Their tragedy serves as a warning to all future generations about the dangers of abandoning the principles that make civilized society possible. The witch trials of Salem Village ended more than 3 centuries ago, but their lessons remain as relevant today as they were in 1692. In a world still plagued by prejudice, fear, and the temptation to scapegoat the different and the vulnerable, we need these lessons more than ever. The victims of Salem died so that future generations might learn from their tragedy and build a more just and tolerant world. Their sacrifice was not in vain if we remember their stories, honor their memory, and commit ourselves to ensuring that such tragedies never happen again. The best memorial to the victims of the Salem witch trials is not a monument of stone, but a living commitment to the principles of justice, tolerance, and human dignity that their deaths helped to establish. So sleep well tonight, secure in your modern world, but remember the lessons of Salem Village. Remember that the capacity for both good and evil exists in every human heart, that the choice between justice and injustice is one that every generation must make anew, and that the price of freedom is eternal vigilance against those who would take it away in the name of security, righteousness, or the greater good. The witch trials remind us that civilization is not a permanent achievement, but a fragile construction that must be constantly maintained and defended. The same forces that led to the Salem witch trials, fear, prejudice, ignorance, and the desire for simple answers to complex problems, these forces are still with us today. The only defense against them is knowledge, courage, and an unwavering commitment to the principles of justice and human dignity. In Salem Village, 1692, ordinary people became capable of extraordinary evil because they allowed fear to overcome reason, because they chose conformity over conscience, and because they valued security more than justice. Their story is a cautionary tale for all of us, a reminder that the choice between good and evil is not always clear, and that the greatest dangers to freedom often come not from obvious enemies, but from well-meaning people who are willing to sacrifice principle for the sake of peace. The victims of the Salem witch trials call out to us across the centuries, reminding us of the cost of intolerance, the price of prejudice, and the danger of abandoning our principles in times of crisis. Their voices echo in every courtroom where justice is served, in every classroom where critical thinking is taught, and in every community where diversity is celebrated rather than feared. Rest well and remember Salem, remember the innocent who died, the community that lost its way, and the lessons that must never be forgotten. In remembering, we honor the dead and protect the living. In learning from the past, we build a better future. And in defending the principles of justice and human dignity, we ensure that the tragedy of Salem Village will never be repeated. The story of Salem Village is ultimately a story about us, about our capacity for both good and evil, about our responsibility to protect the innocent and defend the vulnerable, and about our obligation to learn from the mistakes of the past. It's a story that reminds us that freedom is not free, that justice requires vigilance, and that the price of civilization is constant effort to be better than our fears, our prejudices, and our worst impulses. Sleep well, but remember Salem. The dead demand nothing less, and the living deserve nothing more.